The car glides smoothly down the avenue, but Kendrick feels every jolt of the cracked asphalt. The neighborhood is still the same in many ways. The low-rise buildings, the electricity wires hanging like scars across the sky, the walls covered in graffiti, telling stories of pain and resistance. The corners that were once his refuge now seem smaller than he remembers, but the energy of the place is still pulsating. He rolls down the window, letting the warm California wind touch his face as he takes in every detail. The hip-hop that plays softly on the radio isn't just music. It is an echo of everything that formed it. He stops the car in front of a modest house. The iron gate still creaks like before, and the door opens before he even knocks. A firm hug, a smile that carries years of stories, and Kendrick feels at home. His childhood friend welcomes him as if no amount of fame had changed what they had. Inside, the laughs are easy, but the conversation soon turns to the reality they know well. Compton is still fighting the same ghosts. Kendrick hears stories about young people being pulled into the cycle of violence, about friends lost to the system or the streets. This weighs on his mind as he says goodbye and decides to take a little walk. With each step, he feels the past blend into the present. He remembers the improvised rap battles on the sidewalks, the escapes from fights that could have been fatal, the voices that said he would never get out of there, but he left. And now, even though he is one of the greatest artists in the world, he feels like he never completely left. His gaze meets faces that reflect a life he could have lived if fate had given him a different push. The sun begins to set when he decides to enter a small market on the corner. The doorbell jingles, and he gets some curious looks. Kendrick keeps his head down, grabbing a bottle of water and some junk food to chew on. The market owner, a man who seems to remember him, gives a discreet nod of recognition. The exchange of money happens wordlessly, and Kendrick steps out onto the sidewalk, but there is something out of place. A chill runs up his spine before he even understands why. Across the street, a group of young people leaning against a car watch their movements. They're not just looking, they're analyzing. He feels the weight of the stairs, but pretends not to notice, opening the bottle of water and taking a sip as he walks slowly. It is in these moments that the instincts of years of survival speak loudest. He notices the reflection of one of them moving through the glass of a closed store. Discreet but determined steps approach. Kendrick keeps walking, keeping pace, but his mind is already racing. He knows what's about to happen. Danger approaches, and, in that moment, past and present meet in a way he could never predict. The footsteps behind him quicken. Kendrick keeps his eyes forward, but he already knows what's happening. The tension in the air becomes palpable, and before he can react, he feels a firm touch on his shoulder. He turns slowly, and there he is, a young man, perhaps no more than 17, with his hand firmly on the waistband of his pants. The eyes are cold, but there is something in them, a hesitation, a doubt that lasts only a second before being replaced by the harshness that the streets teach. The boy pulls the gun without hesitation. The metallic sheen catches the light from the streetlights, and Kendrick feels a chill run down his spine. Time seems to slow down, but he knows there is no room for error. He raises his hands, keeping his voice calm, trying to show that he doesn't want any trouble. Everything passes. The boy's voice is firm, but not unshakable. Kendrick knows he can't argue. He slides his wallet out of his pocket and holds it out, then hands over his cell phone. The boy grabs the items in a hurry, his nervous gaze dancing around, looking for witnesses. He's tense, and Kendrick recognizes that kind of tension, the kind that comes from fear. For a moment, he sees himself reflected in that boy, the way he keeps his feet firmly on the ground, ready to run if necessary, the way his hand shakes slightly, even as his face tries to show indifference. Kendrick has met many like him. He was already friends with some. The boy takes a step back, still pointing the gun, but now his breathing is faster. Something bothers him. Kendrick notices. He doesn't want to do this. Maybe it's not the first time, maybe it is, but something inside him is holding back, and then suddenly he turns and runs. The footsteps echo on the asphalt, disappearing into the darkness between the houses. Kendrick stands there, still. He should feel relieved that he was unharmed, but something inside him won't allow it. There is something wrong with that scene. The way the boy looked at him before leaving, as if he recognized something, as if he hadn't expected to meet Kendrick Lamar that night. He lets out a sigh, looks at the empty street around him, and realizes that this story is far from over. Now, before continuing this story, I want to ask you a question. How many times have you heard of stories like this? Situations that could just be cold statistics, but that carry real lives, deep dilemmas and paths that could have been different. If this type of story makes you reflect, if it captures your attention, then I invite you to subscribe now. Here, every story has a purpose. Every detail matters. Press the subscribe button and stay with us, because what comes next will surprise you even more. Nightlife in Compton has always had a sound of its own. The distant echo of sirens mixed with the noise of muffled conversations on street corners, engines revving through dimly lit streets, dogs barking in the distance. Kendrick already knew this soundtrack like no one else. As you walk back to your car, you feel a weight in your chest that isn't about what happened, but about what could have happened. He's been there before, not exactly as a victim, but as someone who has seen these scenes repeat themselves too many times. Inside the car, with his hands firmly on the steering wheel, he doesn't start the engine immediately. The silence around is uncomfortable, but inside, the noise is deafening. Memory pulls back scenes he thought he had already left behind. He remembers the nights he walked home quickly, feeling the same chill down his spine that he felt now, from the weight of a gun pointed at him when he was still just a boy trying to find a place in the world. The temptation to follow a path that seemed to be the only real option for those growing up there. He sees flashes of faces from the past, friends who weren't as lucky as him. Some died too soon, others were swallowed by the system. He thinks about how in a parallel universe he could have been that kid who ran after having his wallet and cell phone stolen. How one tiny detail could have changed everything. What saved Kendrick? The music. The gift he discovered early, the words he found to express his anger, his pain, his ambition. But not everyone has this refuge. Not everyone gets that unlikely chance, that push in the right direction. And now, he can't stop thinking about the boy. The hesitation in his gaze was real. Kendrick feels it. The boy didn't want to do that, or maybe I didn't want to be that kind of person. But there, in those streets, wanting is not enough. You do what you need to survive. And that means that if no one intervenes, that young man could end up like so many others. He could be one mistake away from losing everything. The idea grows inside Kendrick like a heavy beat forming in his mind. He needs to find that boy, not to get back what was stolen, but because somehow he feels like it wasn't a random encounter. He doesn't believe in coincidences. He's been in that place, and now maybe it's his turn to do for someone what no one has done for him. But how will he find it? The boy disappeared into the darkness, leaving no trace. Kendrick has some connections in the neighborhood, old acquaintances who still hang out there. But asking about a robbery like this can lead to problems. He needs to be careful. Still, he knows one thing. He won't leave without trying. He starts the car but doesn't drive away. He just sits there, fingers drumming on the steering wheel, feeling like the real story hasn't even begun yet. What he doesn't know is that, when trying to find the boy, he may end up discovering something that will change his life forever. The streets of Compton have always had a code of their own, and Kendrick knew that if he wanted answers, he needed to talk to the right people. He was no longer a boy, running through alleys and vacant lots, but his name still carried weight there. Some doors that were closed to outsiders could open to him. He started slowly, talking to acquaintances who still had their feet firmly planted in that world. First, he stopped by an old friend's barbershop, a place where conversations were as sharp as blades. He threw the matter into the air without haste, without making it clear that he was the victim. He asked about the youngest players in the game, the ones making noise in the streets. A name emerged, a nickname actually, Lil Ghost. Young, new on the scene, but already trying to prove that he deserved respect. The next stop was a convenience store where Kendrick used to buy candy as a child. The owner still remembered him, and after a few exchanges of words, mentioned that a group used to meet in an abandoned house nearby. He couldn't tell if the Lil Ghost guy was there, but Kendrick already had a clue. Standing on the sidewalk, looking up at the dark sky, Kendrick considered his options. That wasn't the smartest decision. He knew that entering gang territory was no joke. But what was at stake there went beyond a simple robbery. That boy's face remained in his mind, like a mirror of what could have been his own story. The house was a building forgotten by time, broken windows, graffiti covering the walls. Outside, some parked motorcycles and cars indicated that he was not alone. Kendrick took a deep breath before approaching. He wasn't just a kid from Compton anymore. It was Kendrick Lamar. But this fame could be both a protection and a target. He knocked on the door lightly. No response. Tried again. A sound of footsteps came from inside, and then the door partially opened. The man on the other side's gaze was cold, analyzing. Kendrick recognized the guy. A soldier of the streets, always ready for the worst. "What do you want?" The voice was harsh, impatient. Kendrick kept his posture relaxed but firm. "I'm looking for a boy. Lil Ghost." The man frowned, then chuckled softly. "Does he owe you anything?" "Something like that." The silence lengthened. The man assessed Kendrick for a few more seconds before opening the door wider and stepping to the side. "Come in." The smell of cigarettes and alcohol filled Kendrick's nostrils as he crossed the threshold. Some people were scattered around the place, some playing cards, others just watching. The atmosphere was charged, but no one said anything. Everyone knew who he was, but inside, a rapper's fame didn't mean as much as the street hierarchy. Lil Ghost was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his cell phone. When he saw Kendrick, his body stiffened. His gaze met the rapper's for a moment, then quickly looked away. Tension grew in the environment. "You," Kendrick said, without needing to raise his voice. The boy looked around as if looking for an escape route, but he knew he had nowhere to go. "It was nothing personal," Lil Ghost murmured, but his expression betrayed a greater internal conflict than he wanted to show. Kendrick crossed his arms, keeping his eyes fixed on him. "We need to talk." Silence weighed on the environment. Everyone there waited to see what would happen, but what Kendrick didn't know was that that night was about to change more than just Lil Ghost's life. Lil Ghost didn't expect to see him there. His eyes widened for a split second before he stood up from the couch, his breathing short, his muscles tense, as if he was ready to bolt at any moment. Kendrick realized it instantly. He knew how to recognize a cornered boy, not just physically, but mentally. He was once one. The others inside the house watched the scene carefully, waiting to see how it would unfold. It wasn't normal for a guy like Kendrick Lamar to show up there, even less to look for someone like Lil Ghost. The atmosphere became heavy, and for a moment it seemed like someone might do something impulsive. But Kendrick showed no fear. That's not what he came for. Lil Ghost took a step back, eyes scanning the room, searching for a way out. Kendrick, noticing this, raised a hand, a subtle, non-threatening gesture. "Relax," he said, his voice firm but calm. The boy was still alert, but he didn't run. Maybe it was the weight of Kendrick's presence. Maybe it was the surprise of seeing him there. The rapper took a step forward, reducing the distance between them, without rushing, without sudden movements. "Why?" Kendrick asked. The word floated in the air, heavier than any accusation. Silence took over the room. The others around exchanged glances, but no one interfered. Lil Ghost frowned, confused. "What? Why?" Kendrick repeated, without taking his eyes off him. "Why did you do that?" The boy opened his mouth to respond automatically, perhaps to release some cliché excuse, some empty justification, but nothing came out. He hesitated, and that's where Kendrick saw it. Beneath the hard shell of the gangster in training, there was a lost boy. A boy who, in another reality, could have been him. The tension on Lil Ghost's face began to change. His eyebrows furrowed, but not in anger, in doubt. He didn't expect that question. I expected screams, maybe threats, but not that. I needed it, he finally said, but his voice didn't have the same conviction as before. Did you need the money? Kendrick insisted, keeping his tone neutral. Lil Ghost looked away, crossing his arms as if to protect himself. I needed to survive. Kendrick nodded slowly. He knew that answer. I had heard it before, but there was more there, something the boy wasn't saying yet. Survive how? Kendrick asked. The boy pursed his lips, hesitantly. For a moment it seemed that he would close himself off again, that the old reflex to hide everything would take over again. But then he took a deep breath and blurted out the truth. My sister. Kendrick narrowed his eyes. What about her? Lil Ghost lowered his head for a moment, his shoulders slumping a little. For once, he didn't look like a young man trying to prove a point. He just looked like an older brother carrying a weight too great for his age. I was the only one left to take care of her. The confession hung in the air. Kendrick felt something inside him move. It wasn't just a random robbery. He wasn't just another kid trying to assert himself on the streets. He was a young man desperately trying to keep someone he loved safe. And for the first time that night, Kendrick knew for sure that this meeting was no coincidence. The silence between them grew thicker. Kendrick looked at the boy in front of him, and for the first time he saw beyond what was visible. The hardness in Lil Ghost's expression, the way he avoided eye contact, as if he expected the conversation to turn threatening at any moment. But now he didn't just look like a young man trying to make it on the streets. He looked exhausted. Your sister, Kendrick repeated, leaving the word regretful. Lil Ghost took a deep breath, ran a hand over his face, and finally looked back at Kendrick. There was something there, a flicker of vulnerability that he tried to hide but was already exposed. She's 8 years old. His voice was lower now. And there's no one else but me. Kendrick felt a tightness in his chest. He knew this story. Not exactly like that, but he knew the feeling of carrying more weight than he should for his age. Your parents, Kendrick began, but the boy shook his head before he even finished. They died. My father, I don't even remember him. My mother, he swallowed. It was 2 years ago. Cancer. Since then it's been me and my sister. Kendrick was silent, taking it all in. He could see in the boy's posture the weight of everything he had been holding alone. It was the kind of thing that no one noticed from the outside. To the world, Lil Ghost was just another gang kid, doing what everyone else did. But inside him there was a bigger reason for all that. I tried to do it the right way, he continued, as if, now that he started talking, he couldn't stop. I tried normal work, but nobody wants to hire someone like me. School, I stopped going. My sister needed food, she needed clothes. I couldn't wait all month for a salary that wouldn't even pay half the rent. He looked up at Kendrick, and there was no pride or defiance there. There was something deeper, a mixture of anger, frustration, and above all, resignation. I didn't choose this life. I was thrown into it. The words hung in the air, resonating in Kendrick's chest in a way he hadn't expected, because even though his life had taken a different path, he knew exactly what it was like to feel like the world was pushing you towards an inevitable destiny. The difference between them, Kendrick had a way out. The song appeared at the right time, opening doors he didn't even know existed. But how many other kids like Lil Ghost never got that chance? He looked around, feeling the weight of the decision he needed to make. He wasn't there to retrieve a cell phone or a wallet. He was there because somehow he knew that moment meant more. Now he understood what was at stake. But the big question was, what would he do with this truth? And this is where everything changes, because Kendrick Lamar isn't just a famous rapper. It carries a story, a mission, and now, with this truth in his hands, he needs to decide what his next step will be. What can he do for this boy? What can he do to break this cycle? If you want to see how this story unfolds, stay with us, because what comes next could be even more surprising. Kendrick's gaze remained steady, analyzing Lil Ghost's every expression. Now that he knew the truth, the boy's story weighed on him in a different way. He was no longer just a young man lost on the streets. He was a brother trying to survive, trapped in a cycle from which it seemed impossible to escape. And Kendrick knew that if he didn't do something now, that boy might not have much time left. He took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the moment. I couldn't act on impulse. Anything he said there needed to be